The wind outside River Run carried the smell of rain and war. Robb Stark stood alone in the dim light of his chamber, staring at the letter in his hand for the third time. It was from his mother. The words were simple, but they felt heavy. You are a king now. Kings do not have the luxury of choosing love over duty. He folded the letter slowly. Talisa's laughter still echoed in his mind, the way she spoke without fear. The way she looked at him, not as a king, not as a wolf, but as a man. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine a different life, one without crowns, without blood, without the weight of the North on his shoulders. But that life did not exist. Outside, banners of the direwolf snapped against the gray sky. Thousands of men had marched for him, bled for him. They called him King in the North, and a king could not afford weakness. He had given his word to House Frey, and a Stark's word was supposed to mean something. That night, Robb did not go to Talisa. He did not let himself. Instead, he summoned his mother. Catelyn entered quietly, her face tired but strong. She studied him carefully, as if trying to read the decision in his eyes before he spoke. I will honor the pact, Robb said at last. For a second, she did not react. Then her shoulders eased, just slightly. You are doing the right thing. Robb nodded, though it didn't feel right. It felt like cutting off a piece of himself. The next morning, he met Talisa in the courtyard. The rain had begun to fall lightly, turning the stones dark beneath their feet. She smiled when she saw him, but the smile faded when she noticed his expression. You look like a man marching to his execution, she said softly. Maybe I am, he replied. He did not lie to her. He told her everything. About the promise, about the phrase, about how fragile their alliance truly was. He expected anger, maybe tears. Instead, Talisa surprised him. You are a king, she said quietly, and your people need you to be one. Her strength hurt more than if she had begged him to stay. He touched her hand once, briefly. In another world, she nodded. But not this one. And just like that, it ended. There was no secret wedding, no broken vow, no whisper of betrayal carried downriver to the twins. Word reached Lord Walder Frey within the week that Robb Stark would fulfill his promise and take one of his daughters as wife. The old man was suspicious by nature, but even he understood what it meant for a king to bend his pride. The crossing at the twins remained open. The Frey forces stayed loyal, and far to the south, in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister received very different reports than he expected. They say the young wolf keeps his word, one of his informants told him. Tywin's fingers tightened slightly on his cup. Pity, he muttered, because without betrayal, war became far more complicated. Months passed, and the war shifted. With the Freys secured and the Tully standing firm, Robb's position in the Riverlands grew stronger. His victories were no longer just daring raids. They were calculated strikes. Supply lines burned. Lannister banners fell one by one. The North believed again. Even Roose Bolton watched carefully, his pale eyes calculating. The opportunity for treachery had grown smaller. Without a broken marriage pact, there was no insult to exploit, no simple way to turn allies against the Starks. Robb had closed the door to one betrayal. But war always opened another. News arrived from the Iron Islands. Theon Greyjoy had taken Winterfell. The words felt like knives. Robb read the message in silence, his jaw tightening. He had trusted Theon like a brother. He would not make that mistake again. I will retake the North, he told his bannermen. And when I do, the Kraken will learn what it means to betray a wolf. There was steel in his voice now. The softness that once lived behind his eyes had faded. Duty had carved it away. And somewhere deep inside him, the boy who once dreamed of love was disappearing. The wedding at the twins was not grand, but it was strategic. Robb married Rosalind Frey beneath watchful eyes. It was not passion, it was politics. She was shy, nervous, but not unkind. Robb treated her with respect, though his heart remained locked behind walls he had built himself. The Freys celebrated loudly, wine flowed, music echoed through the hall, but there was no massacre, no sudden music shifting into horror. No blood-staining Stark banners. The Red Wedding never happened. Instead, alliances hardened. The North stood united. And for the first time since the war began, whispers spread across Westeros that perhaps the young wolf might actually win. Tywin Lannister understood the danger immediately. A living king in the North was far more threatening than a dead martyr. Plans began to change in King's Landing. Spies moved like shadows. Letters were written in careful ink, because if Robb Stark would not destroy himself with love, then his enemies would have to find another way. And as winter crept slowly closer, the game grew darker. Robb stood one night beneath the cold sky, staring north. Snowflakes drifted through the air, thin and uncertain. He had chosen duty over love. He had chosen honor over desire. But he was beginning to understand something terrible. Sometimes, surviving betrayal only meant facing a far more dangerous enemy. And somewhere far beyond the wall, something ancient stirred, uncaring about kings, crowns, or broken hearts. The war did not slow down after the wedding. If anything, it became sharper, more dangerous. Robb felt it in the air. Men looked at him differently now, not just as a warrior, but as a king who had chosen duty over his own heart. That mattered in the North. Word spread quickly. The young wolf had kept his vow. The Freys were satisfied. The Riverlords felt secure, and for the first time since the war began, there was real stability in his camp. But stability in wartime was fragile. Robb called a council inside Riverrun's solar. Candles flickered against stone walls as his bannermen gathered. The Blackfish, Great Sean Umber, Roose Bolton, Edmure Tully, and others. Their armor clinked softly as they moved. The Lannisters are stretched thin, Robb began, spreading a map across the table. Stannis presses from Dragonstone. The Reach supports King Joffrey, but they guard their own lands first. Tywin cannot be everywhere. The Blackfish nodded. So we force him to choose. Robb's finger chose the western coast. We strike Casterly Rock. The room went quiet. Even Roose Bolton raised an eyebrow. To attack the lion in his den. Edmure said carefully. That is bold. It is necessary, Robb replied. As long as Tywin sits comfortably behind golden walls, this war drags on. If we threaten his home, he will make mistakes. There was fire in Robb now, not reckless but cold and controlled. He had grown, pain had shaped him. Roose Bolton spoke softly. And Winterfell, the word hung in the air. Theon Greyjoy still held it. The North still bled. Robb's jaw tightened. I have sent men north under trusted command. The Ironborn will not keep my home. He did not say how much it haunted him. How every night he imagined his brothers alone, frightened, surrounded by enemies. He carried that guilt silently. The council ended with plans in motion. Ravens flew before dawn. Far away, in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister read the reports with a frown. He stood beside the painted table, candlelight reflecting in his sharp eyes. He moves west? Tyrion asked. Tywin nodded slowly. The boy learns. That's inconvenient. Yes, Tywin said calmly. Very. Without the insult to House Frey, there had been no simple arrangement, no wedding plot, no quick solution. The Freys were firmly tied to Robb now. Bolton had not yet shown open ambition. The North remained united, and a united North was dangerous. Tywin turned toward the window overlooking the city. If we cannot divide him through dishonor, we will divide him through fear. Meaning, winter. Back in the Riverlands, Robb prepared to march. Before leaving, he visited Roslyn in their chamber. She stood by the window, hands folded. She still seemed unsure around him. He did not blame her. She had been given to a king she barely knew. You are riding west, she said softly. Yes. She hesitated, then gathered courage. Will you return? He looked at her, really looked at her. She was not Talisa. She never would be. But she was not his enemy either. I intend to win, he answered. I intend to win, he answered. It was not the same as a promise. But it was honest. She stepped closer. My father believes you are honorable. I try to be. Do not let this war take that from you." The words struck deeper than she knew, because war was already taking pieces of him. Days later, the Stark host moved like a gray wave across the land. Villages cheered as they passed. Small folk whispered hope. The young wolf had never been defeated in open battle. But victories came with a cost. Scouts reported Lannister forces regrouping near the crag. Robb adjusted quickly. He split his army, sending flanking forces through wooded hills. It was a risk, but a calculated one. Battle came at dawn. Steel clashed. Arrows darkened the sky. The sound of men screaming mixed with the pounding of hooves. Robb rode at the front, his direwolf banner snapping above him. He fought like something possessed. Every strike precise, every movement controlled fury. By midday, the Lannister line broke. Another victory, another step closer to Casterly Rock. But when the battlefield quieted, Robb walked among the fallen. Stark men, Stark men, boys from the north who would never see snow again. Honor did not bring them back. That night, a raven arrived. It carried terrible news. Winterfell had fallen, not to Ironborn, but to treachery. Ramsay Stowe had taken the castle under false banners. Theon was missing. Bran and Rickon were believed dead. Robb read the letter twice, then a third time. He did not speak for a long while. The wind outside his tent felt colder than before. "They were just boys," he said finally. No one answered. Something inside him hardened completely in that moment. Love had been the first sacrifice. Now innocence was the second. "I will finish this war," Robb said quietly, quickly. There was no anger in his tone now, just decision. Roose Bolton watched him carefully from across the firelight, pale eyes unreadable. Because a king driven by grief was powerful, but he was also vulnerable, and far in the north, the truth about Bran and Rickon remained hidden. The game of lies had only grown deeper. Winter was no longer creeping, it was arriving. Robb Stark had avoided one catastrophe by honoring his vow, but fate was not done testing him. The news about Winterfell changed everything. Robb did not shout. He did not break down. That was not his way. Instead, he became quieter, harder. The men around him noticed it immediately. The laughter in camp faded. The young wolf no longer smiled at victories. He called his lords again, this time under a sky heavy with dark clouds. "Winterfell has fallen," he said plainly. "My brothers are believed dead." A low murmur spread through the tent. Greychon Umber cursed loudly. Edmure Tully looked shaken. Even the Blackfish lowered his head in respect. "But we do not retreat," Robb continued. "That is what our enemies expect. If we turn north now, Tywin will recover. The war will drag on for years. More sons will die." He paused. "We end this first." There was steel in those words. Roose Bolton stepped forward slightly. "And after?" "After," Robb said, his voice cold as northern ice. "We cleanse the north." The campaign west intensified. Robb moved faster than before. He struck supply caravans, burned storehouses, and forced Lannister forces into defensive positions. Casterly Rock was not yet under siege, but the threat was real enough to shake the Lion's pride. In King's Landing, Tywin Lannister stood before the Iron Throne, his face unreadable. "He advances too quickly," Cersei snapped. "Why is he still alive?" "Because underestimating him was our first mistake," Tywin replied calmly. Tyrion leaned against a pillar, and without the phrase to stab him in the back, "We are running out of shortcuts." Tywin's eyes hardened. "There are always shortcuts. But they grow more expensive." Tywin began sending quiet messages northward, not to the phrase this time. They were satisfied, loyal for now. No. His ravens flew to the Dreadfort. Back in the Stark camp, tension simmered. Lord Rickard Karstark requested a private audience. His sons had died in battle months earlier, captured and executed by the Lannisters. Grief had been eating at him slowly. "You hold Jaime Lannister prisoner," Karstark said, his voice thick with restrained anger. "The Kingslayer breathes while my boys rot." Robb met his gaze evenly. "Jaime is worth more alive than dead. He murdered my sons. He is leverage. He is justice." The word echoed. Robb stepped closer. If I kill him, we lose our strongest bargaining chip. This war is not about vengeance, it is about survival. Karstark's eyes darkened. Spoken like a boy who still has brothers, the words cut deep, but Robb did not strike him. He did not shout, he simply said, "You forget yourself." Karstark left furious, and fury, in wartime, was dangerous. Days later, the camp awoke to chaos. Jaime Lannister was gone. Two young Lannister prisoners, boys, were found dead in their cell. Karstark had taken his revenge. Robb stood over the bodies in silence. They were barely men. War had swallowed them too. They were children, he said quietly. So were your brothers, Karstark replied coldly. The camp waited. Robb's heart pounded, but his face showed nothing. You have murdered prisoners under my protection, Robb said. You have broken the law of your king. Karstark did not kneel. I have avenged my blood and divided my army. The silence was suffocating. If Robb let this pass, he would look weak. If he punished Karstark, he would lose half his forces. He thought of his father. Honor, duty, the weight of a crown. Rickard Karstark, Robb said slowly, I sentence you to death. Gasps spread through the gathered men. Even the Blackfish looked uneasy. But Robb did not hesitate. He carried out the sentence himself. When the sword fell, something shifted in the army. Some men respected him more. Others whispered resentment. The Karstark forces abandoned the camp that very night. Robb had chosen honor again, and paid for it. That evening, he sat alone outside his tent. Gray wind lay beside him, restless. The wind carried the smell of coming frost. Catelyn approached quietly. You did what you believed was right, she said gently. I did what father would have done. And do you think it will win this war? Robb did not answer immediately. I don't know anymore, he admitted. For the first time, doubt slipped through. He had avoided one disaster by keeping his vow. He had kept the phrase loyal. The Red Wedding never happened. But fate did not need one single tragedy. It simply found new paths. Far in the north, Ramsay Snow tightened his hold. Fear spread through Winterfell. Roose Bolton read Tywin's letters carefully, weighing ambition against patience. And in the west, Lannister forces began regrouping with fresh reinforcements from the Reach. Robb's victories were real. But his army was smaller now, his enemies were adapting, and winter had finally begun to fall in earnest. Snow drifted across the camps as the young wolf stared into the dark. He had sacrificed love. He had sacrificed alliances. He had sacrificed mercy. The question that haunted him now was simple. Would it be enough? Snow began to fall thicker as the army pushed deeper into the west. It covered the mud, softened the smell of blood, and hid the graves of fallen men. To many, it felt like a blessing. To Robb, it felt like a blessing. To Robb, it felt like a warning. His forces were smaller now. The Karstarks had ridden away in anger. Supplies were stretched thin, but his core remained loyal. Umbers, Mormonts, Tully men, and Frey soldiers bound by marriage and pride. The alliance still stood. That mattered. Scouts returned one bitter morning with urgent news. Lannister and Tyrell banners had joined forces ahead, fresh troops, well-fed, well-equipped. They mean to crush us before we reach the rock, the Blackfish said grimly. Robb studied the map in silence. Good, he answered finally. The words surprised them. They think winter weakens us, he continued. They think we are desperate, so we let them believe it. He laid out his plan calmly. A feigned retreat, draw the combined host into narrow ground near Oxcross, where cavalry would struggle and numbers would matter less. Northern soldiers were raised in harsh lands. Snow and cold were their allies. It was a gamble, but Robb had learned that war favored boldness. Days later, the trap was set. The Stark host appeared to falter, pulling back across frozen hills. Lannister scouts reported weakness. Tyrell knights pressed eagerly forward, hungry for glory. At dawn, the storm hit, not from the sky, from the hills. Horn blasts echoed across the white fields. Stark banners emerged from concealed ridges. Arrows rained down. Direwolves howled through the blizzard. Robb led the charge himself. The clash was brutal and close. Horses slipped on ice. Steel rang in freezing air. Men fought not only each other, but the cold, biting through armor. Robb's sword moved with deadly precision. He no longer fought like a boy proving himself. He fought like a king protecting what remained of his world. By nightfall, the field belonged to the north. The Tyrell commander had fled. Hundreds of Lannister men lay scattered across the snow. It was one of Robb's greatest victories, but victory no longer brought him joy. As he walked among the wounded, he noticed how thin his army looked, how tired. How many? He asked quietly. Too many, the Blackfish answered. That night ravens flew in every direction. Word spread fast. The young wolf had defeated a larger force again. In King's Landing, the news landed like a hammer. Tywin Lannister did not rage. He simply stood very still. The boy forces our hand, he said at last. Cersei paced. Then kill him. With what? Tyrion asked dryly. He wins every battle. Tywin turned slowly. Then we stop fighting his battles. And that was when the real shift began. Instead of marching west again, Lannister forces began striking the riverlands behind Robb. Villages burned. Supply lines were cut. Smaller Stark garrisons were attacked suddenly at night. The war changed shape. Robb realized it too late. They want us to chase smoke, he muttered when reports reached him. Roose Bolton, quiet as ever, spoke carefully. Perhaps we should divide our strength. Secure the riverlands first. Dividing meant weakening the main host, but ignoring the burning lands meant losing support. Robb felt the trap tightening. At the same time, more troubling whispers reached him from the north. Ramsay Snow was consolidating power. Houses that had once sworn loyalty to Winterfell were bending under fear. The name Bolton was growing louder. Send for Lord Manderley, Robb ordered, and the Glovers. We need eyes in the north. His bannermen obeyed, but distance was an enemy no sword could cut down. One evening, as Robb stood alone overlooking the camp, Rosalind approached him quietly. She had traveled to join him weeks earlier for safety, escorted carefully. You haven't slept, she said gently. There will be time for sleep when this ends. And when will that be? He didn't answer. She stepped closer. My father believes you are unstoppable. Robb let out a faint, humorless breath. Your father believes what keeps him safe. She studied him carefully. And what do you believe? For a moment, he looked very young again. I believe, he said slowly, that every victory costs me something I can't replace. The wind picked up around them. Far to the north, beyond walls and forests, darker things were moving. Reports from the Night's Watch spoke of wildling armies gathering, of strange sightings in the snow. But southern kings were too busy bleeding each other to listen. Winter was no longer coming. It had arrived, and Robb Stark stood at the center of a war that was spreading beyond crowns and castles. He had avoided the Red Wedding. He had kept his honor. He had outplayed his enemies again and again. But now the war was no longer just about defeating lions. It was about surviving the cold, both in men's hearts and in the world itself. And somewhere in the Dreadfort, Roose Bolton read another quiet letter from the south and began calculating how long loyalty was worth more than ambition. The cold no longer felt like weather. It felt like pressure. Every morning the snow lay thicker across the camps, muting footsteps, hiding movement. Fires burned constantly now, eating through dwindling wood supplies. Horses struggled. Men coughed through the night, and the ravens kept coming. More villages burned in the riverlands. Small garrisons wiped out. Lannister forces were no longer meeting Robb in open battle. They were bleeding him slowly. Robb stood over the war table, jaw tight. They want us tired, he said. Hungry. Frustrated. They're succeeding, Great John Umber muttered. Roose Bolton remained calm, pale eyes thoughtful. We could return north, he suggested carefully. Secure Winterfell. Rally fresh strength. Let the south exhaust itself. It sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. Robb studied him. And abandon our allies here? A temporary retreat, Roose corrected softly. The Blackfish shook his head. Retreat becomes weakness. Weakness invites rebellion. Robb made his decision quickly. We hold the riverlands, but we move differently. That night, he changed strategy entirely. Instead of chasing Lannister raids, he divided his army into smaller, fast-moving groups led by commanders he trusted deeply. They would patrol constantly, never staying in one place long enough to be surrounded. Communication would rely on mounted riders instead of ravens alone. War would become fluid, unpredictable. For weeks, it worked. Lannister raiding parties began disappearing. Supply wagons vanished in snowstorms. Tyrell knights found themselves ambushed at river crossings by northern spearmen who melted back into forests afterward. Robb adapted, but so did his enemies. One evening, a rider arrived from the twins, exhausted and shaking. Lord Walder Frey requests immediate reassurance of northern protection, the man reported. Lannister envoys had been seen near the crossing. The words settled heavily. The Freys were loyal, but loyalty built on advantage could crack under pressure. If the twins fall to the lions, Edmure said, we lose everything between north and south. Robb nodded slowly. He understood now what Tywin was doing. If he could not kill the young wolf, he would isolate him. That night, Robb called for Roose Bolton privately. You will ride north, Robb said. Take a strong force, secure Moat Callan, reassert Stark authority. Remind every northern house where their loyalty lies. Roose's expression did not change. And Winterfell, if Ramsay Snow holds it still, Robb said coldly. Bring him to me alive. Roose bowed slightly. As you command. When he left, Catelyn stepped from the shadows. She had heard enough. You trust him, she said quietly. I trust necessity, Robb replied. But even as he said it, something felt uneasy in his chest. Days later, Bolton forces marched north. And almost immediately, strange reports began filtering back. Communication slowed. Messages became shorter, less detailed. Robb tried not to let suspicion grow. He had too many enemies already. Then came worse news. Stannis Baratheon had sailed north. At first, the information seemed uncertain, but more ravens confirmed it. Stannis had landed near the wall, answering the Night's Watch call against wildling forces gathering beyond. That changed everything. If Stannis gains northern loyalty, the Blackfish warned, he could challenge your crown. Robb considered it carefully. Stannis was rigid, unbending, but not dishonorable. Or, Robb said slowly, he could become an ally. Catelyn looked surprised. You would bend the knee? That night, alone in his tent, Robb finally allowed himself to feel the weight fully. He had kept his promise, avoided betrayal at the twins, saved thousands from slaughter. But the war had simply grown larger. Now it stretched from Casterly Rock to the Wall. And something else was happening. Reports from the Night's Watch spoke not only of wildlings, but of dead men walking in the snow, of blue eyes in the darkness. Most southern lords dismissed it as fear. Robb did not. He remembered old Nan's stories, and winter had never felt like this before. A week later, another raven arrived. This one carried a seal from White Harbor. Lord Manderley's message was short but chilling. Bolton banners fly beside Stark banners in the north. Ramsay Snow has taken Winterfell in your name. Robb read it twice, then a third time, in your name. He understood immediately. Roose Bolton was not crushing rebellion. He was claiming it, slowly, carefully, legally. Clever, Robb whispered. He had avoided the Red Wedding. But betrayal had simply taken a colder shape. Roose would not stab him openly. He would undermine him quietly. Claim necessity, claim order, claim protection of the North while Robb bled in the South. The game had changed again. Robb rose to his feet. Prepare the army, he ordered. We march north. Greyjohn blinked. And the Lannisters? They can burn empty fields, Robb said. The heart of this war is not gold. It was home. Snow fell heavily as the Stark host turned northward at last. Behind them, the west smoldered. Ahead of them waited uncertainty. And somewhere beyond the wall, ancient eyes watched the growing storm of men tearing each other apart. Robb Stark had chosen honor once. He had chosen strategy again and again. Now he would choose something else. Not love. not revenge, but survival. For the North, for his house, for whatever future remained in a world growing darker by the day. And as the banners shifted direction, the winds began to howl louder. The march north felt different from every other campaign. When Robb had first ridden south, it had been with fire in his blood and vengeance in his heart. His father had been executed. His sisters were captives. War had been clear. Now it was complicated. Now the enemy wore familiar faces. Snow swallowed the King's Road as the Stark host pushed forward. Supplies were thin, morale uncertain. Some men whispered that abandoning the Riverlands would cost them everything. Others were relieved. They were Northerners. The cold felt like home. But home was not what it used to be. More reports reached Robb as they rode. Roose Bolton had secured Moat Cailin quickly, too quickly. Ramsay Snow was restoring order in Winterfell. Houses that had hesitated were bending the knee again, but not directly to Robb. To the Boltons. He's building gratitude, the Blackfish said grimly one night beside the fire. Men remember who stands beside them in crisis. Robb stared into the flames. He stands where I cannot, and that is dangerous. Robb knew it. If he accused Roose without proof, he would fracture the North himself. If he ignored it, Bolton influence would grow until it was too strong to uproot. For the first time, Robb began thinking not just like a warrior, but like a ruler playing a long game. We don't confront him, Robb decided. We arrive united, strong, publicly grateful for his service. The Blackfish gave a faint smile. And privately? Robb said coldly. Robb said coldly. We remind him who he serves. Days later, another rider arrived, nearly frozen to death. Stannis Baratheon has defeated the wildlings at the wall, the man gasped. He saved the Night's Watch. That news spread through the army like wind through dry grass. Stannis was no longer just a southern claimant. He was a northern protector. Robb absorbed the implications carefully. If Stannis marched south now, claiming loyalty from northern houses grateful for his defense, the situation would grow even more unstable. He could not fight Lannisters, Boltons, and Baratheons at the same time, which meant one thing. He would have to talk. When the Stark host finally crossed into northern territory, something shifted. Men stood straighter. The direwolf banner seemed stronger against the white sky. But villages they passed bore scars. Burned farms, empty homes. Fear lingered in the air. Winterfell rose in the distance days later. The sight of it stopped Robb's breath for a moment. It still stood, but smoke rose from newly repaired towers. Bolton banners hung beside Stark ones, not replacing, beside. That detail mattered. The gates opened slowly. Roose Bolton waited in the courtyard, pale and calm as ever. Ramsay stood slightly behind him, eyes sharp and restless. My king, Roose said smoothly, bowing just enough. Robb dismounted without breaking eye contact. You've held the North in my absence, Robb said evenly. For House Stark, Roose replied. Their eyes locked. Both understood the words were careful. Ramsay stepped forward with a crooked smile. Winterfell is secure. The Ironborn scattered. Traitors dealt with. Robb's voice turned icy. Bran and Rickon? A pause. Believed dead, Roose answered gently. But we continue searching. Robb nodded once. He would not grieve here. Not in front of them. That evening, a feast was held in the great hall. It felt wrong. The hall where he had grown up. Where his father had ruled. Where laughter once filled the air, now it carried tension. Bolton men lined the walls. Northern lords watched carefully. Robb stood and raised his cup. To those who defended the North, he said, and to unity. The word echoed, unity. But beneath the surface, cracks ran deep. Later that night, Robb walked alone through the Godswood. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The heart tree's red leaves stood out against white. He knelt before it. I did what I thought was right, he murmured quietly. The wind gave no answer. Footsteps approached behind him. It was not Bolton. It was a messenger. "Your Grace," the man said urgently. "Stannis Baratheon has sent envoys. He requests a meeting." Robb closed his eyes briefly. Of course he did. Stannis had saved the wall. He had northern gratitude now, and he claimed the Iron Throne by right. 2 kings in the north. That could not last. Robb rose slowly. "Prepare a hall," he said. "We will hear him." As the messenger hurried away, Robb remained under the heart tree a moment longer. He had avoided one betrayal. He had survived battles meant to destroy him, but now the greatest threat might not be a hidden dagger. It might be a choice. Bend the knee and secure the north under a united front, or refuse and risk another war, this time on frozen soil. Inside Winterfell's walls, Bolton ambition simmered quietly. Beyond them, Stannis waited with fire in his eyes, and far beyond even that, the true winter crept closer, uncaring about crowns. Robb Stark stood at the center of it all, and this time there would be no easy path. The hall was colder than Robb remembered, not from snow or wind, from tension. Stannis Baratheon stood near the center of the great hall of Winterfell, rigid as iron. He did not smile. He did not bow deeply. He simply inclined his head the smallest amount. "King in the north," Stannis said. "Lord of Dragonstone," Robb replied evenly. They studied each other in silence. 2 young kings shaped by war. 2 men carrying heavy claims. Around them stood northern lords, Bolton men, Stark guards. Torches flickered against stone walls that had seen generations of rule. Stannis wasted no time. "I defeated the wildlings," he said plainly. "I answered the Night's Watch when no southern king would. The realm is fractured. The true enemy gathers beyond the wall. We do not have time for pride." Robb appreciated the directness. "You asked me to bend the knee," Robb said. "I offer you survival," Stannis replied. A murmur spread through the hall. Roose Bolton watched carefully from the shadows. Stannis continued. "The Lannisters grow weaker. The Reach cannot hold forever. If we stand united, we end the Southern War swiftly. Then we face what comes from the North together." Robb stepped closer. "And the North?" he asked. "Its independence?" Stannis did not hesitate. "There will be one kingdom, one crown." There it was. Simple, cold, absolute. Robb felt every eye in the hall on him. Months ago, he would have refused instantly. Pride would have answered for him, but he was not that boy anymore. He had lost too much. He thought of the Riverlands burning, of Karstark's execution, of Bolton banners flying beside his own, of rumors of dead men in the snow. He thought of his people, farmers, children, families who did not care about crowns. They cared about surviving winter. "What guarantee do I have?" Robb asked quietly. "That the North will not be treated as conquered land." Stannis met his gaze without blinking. "Because I need it strong. Honesty again, not kindness, not warmth. Need." Before Robb could respond, a voice cut through the hall. "My king," Roose Bolton said smoothly, stepping forward. "May I speak?" Robb turned slowly. "You may." Roose folded his hands calmly. "The North has bled for independence. Many here lost sons for that cause. To bend now could fracture loyalty." He was careful. He was positioning himself as protector of Northern pride. Robb saw it clearly. Stannis' jaw tightened. "Pride will not stop what comes in the dark. And submission will?" Roose replied softly. The air felt sharp as blades. Robb realized something in that moment. Roose did not want unity. Division gave him opportunity. If Robb refused Stannis, war might erupt between them. Bolton could maneuver within that chaos. If Robb accepted, some northern lords might rebel. Again, creating instability Bolton could exploit. Either path carried danger. Unless Robb stepped forward. "I will not bend the knee," he said clearly. A flicker passed through Roose's eyes. Satisfaction. But Robb raised his hand before whispers could grow. "Not today." Silence returned. "I will not kneel as a defeated king," Robb continued. "But neither will I fight you while winter closes around us." He faced Stannis directly. "A pact," Robb said. We fight the Lannisters separately, but we do not fight each other. When the Southern War ends, we gather our strength against what lies beyond the wall. If the dead are real, crowns will not matter." The hall was utterly still. Stannis studied him carefully. "You ask for trust," Stannis said. "I ask for time," Robb answered. Long seconds passed. Then Stannis gave a single nod. "Very well, a temporary accord." Relief moved through some of the northern lords, frustration through others. Roose Bolton's face revealed nothing, but inside, calculations shifted. Later that night, Robb stood again in the Godswood. He had chosen neither submission nor pride. He had chosen balance. It was a dangerous middle ground. Footsteps approached. This time it was not a messenger. It was Lord Manderley. "My king," the older man said quietly, "there are whispers. Ramsay Snow's methods disturb many houses." Robb did not look surprised. "Gather those houses," Robb said softly, quietly. Manderley's eyes sharpened. "You intend to act?" "Not yet," Robb replied. "But soon." For the first time, he was not reacting to threats. He was preparing for them. In the coming days, Stark loyalists were placed strategically within Winterfell's command. Bolton men found themselves reassigned subtly. Small changes, quiet moves. Robb would not confront Roose openly. He would outmaneuver him. Beyond the castle walls, snowstorms grew harsher. Reports from the wall became darker. Rangers disappearing. Villages beyond the Gift silent. Stannis began fortifying northern positions. For a brief moment, two kings held the line together, but peace was thin as ice. Because Roose Bolton had not abandoned ambition, he had only adjusted it, and in the far north, the dead were no longer rumors, they were marching. Robb Stark had avoided the Red Wedding. He had survived southern schemes. He had balanced kings without kneeling. Now the final test approached. Not betrayal, not politics, but the end of everything. The first real proof came at dawn. A rider from the wall arrived half dead, his horse collapsing beneath him as he reached Winterfell's gates. The man was shaking, frost-bitten, barely able to speak. "They're not wildlings," he whispered. "They don't stop." The great hall filled quickly. Robb, Stannis, northern lords, even Roose Bolton stood listening as the ranger described what he had seen. Entire villages wiped out, corpses rising again in the snow, blue eyes glowing in the darkness. No one laughed, because fear has a sound when it enters a room, and it was very quiet. Stannis was the first to speak. "We march." Robb nodded. Every available man. There were no more political games in that moment. No talk of crowns. No whispered ambition. Winter had made its move. Within days, Stark and Baratheon forces rode north together. It was an uneasy alliance, but a real one. Direwolf banners and fiery stag standards moved through blinding snow as one army. Roose Bolton rode with them. He had no choice now. The wall loomed ahead like a frozen giant when they arrived. Black brothers looked exhausted, haunted. The gates opened, and commanders gathered atop the icy battlements. Beyond the wall, movement could already be seen. Not an army like men formed, a tide. The dead did not shout. They did not shout. They simply advanced. Robb stared across the white expanse and felt something settle inside him. All the wars, all the betrayals, all the prails, all the pride. They had been small. This was not small. "This is what we fight," he said quietly. Stannis gave a grim nod. "Light the trenches." The battle that followed did not feel like war between men. It felt like survival against a nightmare. Flaming barriers were lit before the wall. Archers loosed arrows tipped with fire. Catapults hurled burning pitch into advancing waves. When the first of the dead reached the flames, they did not scream. They burned and kept walking, until they fell, until they rose again. The sound of steel striking frozen flesh echoed endlessly. Robb fought at the front beside his men. He had long ago stopped thinking of himself as untouchable. He was simply another sword in the dark. A white lunge for him. Gray wind tore it apart before it could reach him. Another grabbed a soldier beside Robb, dragging him down into the snow. Robb cut it in half, but the soldier's eyes were already turning blue. There was no mercy here, only speed. Stannis' men held firm on the left flank. Northern spearmen braced shields on the right. For hours, fire and steel pushed back the tide, but the cold grew sharper, and then the ground itself seemed to freeze deeper. A figure appeared in the distance, mounted on something pale and terrible, the Night King. Even from afar, his presence felt wrong. The flames flickered lower, the wind screamed louder. For one terrifying moment, Robb thought they would break, and then horns sounded behind them. Reinforcements. Northern houses that had hesitated before now arrived in force. Manderly men, Glovers, even smaller clans that had watched from a distance. They had seen the threat. They had chosen survival over politics. Even Roose Bolton fought fiercely now. Ambition meant nothing if the world ended. With renewed strength, the living pushed back. Fire spread across the snow like a wall of sunrise. When dawn finally broke, the dead retreated, not destroyed, but halted. For now, exhausted soldiers collapsed where they stood. Smoke drifted across blackened ice. Robb leaned on his sword, breathing hard. He looked at Stannis across the battlefield. The two kings met each other's eyes. No words were needed. Later, back within the wall, a council formed again. The cost had been enormous, but they had survived. Stannis spoke first. "We cannot win divided." Robb nodded slowly. This time when he stepped forward, his voice carried no pride. "The North will stand with you," he said, "not because I kneel, but because we must be one people against this." Stannis studied him, then slowly he extended his hand. Robb took it, not as defeated king, not as rival, but as ally. Behind them, Roose Bolton watched quietly, and for the first time, he understood something clearly. There would be no quiet coup now, no fractured loyalties to exploit. The North had seen the true enemy. Ambition shrank in the face of extinction. In the weeks that followed, preparations began in earnest. Dragon glass was gathered. Fortifications strengthened. Messages sent south demanding unity. The War of Crowns faded. The war for survival began. One evening, Robb stood alone on the wall, staring into the endless white. He had avoided the red wedding. He had lost brothers, allies, innocence. He had chosen honor when it cost him. He had chosen strategy when it demanded sacrifice. And now, he had chosen unity over pride. Love had once tempted him away from duty, but duty had shaped him into something stronger, not just a king, a leader. Behind him, the North stood ready. Beside him, unlikely allies prepared. Ahead of him, winter waited, and this time, Robb Stark was ready for it. The Game of Thrones had nearly destroyed them, but the long night would decide who truly deserved to survive.